Hello everybody. Now today I'm going to discuss the paper which was asked in mains this year, paper 1, and today I'll be focusing on section A of this paper. Okay. So discussion of PSIR paper 1 2022 which was asked this Sunday. Okay. Before I proceed with discussion of paper, I would like to focus on the analysis of the paper. Now, when I went through the paper, my analysis is that this is a very standard paper, okay, and a student who is well read would find it convenient to attempt this paper, okay, and especially one thing which I've been emphasizing in the class in particular, that you should always focus on the topics, as their interlinkage among the topic is what UPSC is expecting from the students, and do not go with the notion of that different parts of the syllabus, that they are watertight compartments. Not at all. Okay, what we expected by UPSC is that you have to understand, you have to prepare in a holistic manner, okay, at the same time focusing on interlinkages of the different topics of the syllabus. I'm sure you must have, if you have gone through the paper, you will agree with whatever I am saying. Okay, now this paper gives an edge to the students who have prepared it thoroughly. Okay, so let us proceed with the discussion of the paper. And if you see the first question, if I say, it was asked on systems approach. Okay, now this systems approach, as all of us are aware, that systems approach was given by David Easton. Okay, now this systems approach, if I say this systems approach, now this was given by David Easton. Okay, and if you see, this is 150 words question. Now one thing which you should keep in mind, that in answering this 150 words question, your answer shall be crisp. At the same time, your answer should also focus all the dimensions of the topic. Okay, and that too you have to write in 150 words. Okay, now if you have to attempt this paper, this question, it was very easy. Systems approach. Okay, so system approach, you should start with straight away from the very first word go, hit on the nail. Okay, so systems approach is a pioneering model of political analysis. It was given by David Easton and it was influenced by behavioral revolution. Okay, you should also mention in the introduction that systems approach, it thinks of political system as an open system which is also influenced by the social processes. Okay, so this is what you have to give in the introduction. In the main part, you have to focus on the input-output model of David Easton. So this input-output model, you have to draw a diagram. Input-output model, that how David Easton considered political system as the political system consisting of the inputs, which are demands and supports. Output, the inputs, the demands and supports are the raw materials which are transformed into finished products. Output in forms of the, if you say, decisions and policies. And then there is a feedback mechanism which again goes into the demand. Okay, so this was the political analysis given by David Easton, and if you have to highlight its important points, that how it was used later on by structural functional approach of Almond and Powell, Gabriel Almond and Powell. It was also became the basis of Karl Dosch communication theory. And if we find that the systems approach, it also was very helpful in comparative government and politics. Okay, it helped to understand the politics of the developing countries in a proper way. And in the end, you can write about the weaknesses of the systems approach, where system approach was considered that it was largely status quoist, and systems approach was also unable to analyze, if I say, power relations in society, or it was also unable to realize the mass voting, etc. Yet it was an important advance in an attempt to make the study of politics more scientific. Okay, so if you see in the introduction, I have discussed about what is systems approach. In the main body, I've given about the the input output model. You have to draw diagram also, and then finally you have to highlight the merits and demerits and conclude. 150 words. Okay. Next question was again cultural relativism, and cultural relativism, very direct question. Okay, now that too, the question says write in about 150 words. Now here, if you have to write about cultural relativism, okay, now this cultural relativism, first of all you have to discuss, you have to write about the this cultural relativism approach was obviously, it was derived from the social anthropology, and if you see, Franz was the person who used this in social anthropology. So in the statement itself, you have to refer to the origin of the cultural relativism approach. Moving on to discuss its main points, that cultural relativism, it questioned the universal nature of human rights. Okay, and cultural relativism, if you find, it believed that what are human rights are relative to the culture of a particular community. Okay, so what is human rights? It is not universal form of human rights, but they talk about the rights are specific to the culture. Specific to culture, and human rights are specific to culture, and the way the universality of human rights was promoted, they said it was a form of cultural imperialism of the West. Okay, and here they emphasize that the concept of human rights, they also conflict with the prevailing cultural practices of the community. So what is human rights? It is culture specific. And then you have to mention briefly the very important Asian values debate. Asian values debate, that how Asian values debate, it rejected universalism of human rights in favor of particularism. Okay, Asian values debate, it focused on not on individual rights, it focused on the community rights. And the Asian values debate also focused on the not on political rights but on social economic rights. Okay, and they emphasize that Asia has a different value system which determine what will be the concept of human rights, like respect for authority, respect for family, preference for stability, etc. is there. Now the last part is you have to, in briefly discussing, you have to write about the criticism of the Asian value debate. Criticism, you can also always mention about feminists, that feminists, for example, they say that cultural relativism, it protects many of the practices of that community which are violative of the human rights. For example, if I say female circumcision in Africa, okay, or if I say recently you must be aware of the right of excommunication of the Dawoodi Bohra Muslims. Okay, the matter is in the Supreme Court. Okay, so that is the practice with reference to that community. And I can also mention the ideas of Michael Ignatieff, okay, where he talks about that how the cultural relativism is given by people to protect the status quo of the previous class in that community. Okay, so this is what you have to discuss about the cultural relativism. Moving on to the next one. Now next, if you see, is revolution in permanence. Okay, now this revolution in permanence concept was a concept given by Leon Trotsky. Okay, this revolution in permanence, now this is a concept given by Leon Trotsky, and it is said to be his most important contribution to Marxism. Okay, Leon Trotsky gave that in his the name of his book was Results. The name of his essay was Results and Prospects. Results and Prospects, and the context in which he gave the idea of this revolution in permanence or permanent revolution was obviously the 1905 revolution in Russia. This 1905 revolution in Russia, which was a bourgeois revolution. Okay. So Trotsky in his book, in his article, Results and Prospects, talked about this concept of permanent revolution and what is meant by permanent revolution. Now, Trotsky derived this idea, the revolution in permanence, from the ideas of Karl Marx. Okay. In one of the address, it is said, in one of the address which Marx and Engels gave, it was address of the General Council to the Communist League in the year 1850. Okay. Marx had used the word revolution in permanence or permanent revolution. So the inspiration was obviously the ideas of Karl Marx and Engels, which they used in the year 1850. They used it in the 1850. Now, what is meant by permanent revolution? Now, here you find that Trotsky had in mind the specific situation of Russia. Russia, you find, was not an advanced capitalist country. As compared to Britain, Belgium, France, etc. Russia was a semi-feudal country, and Trotsky believed that the first stage would be a bourgeois democratic revolution, and the second stage would be the revolution led by the proletariat, and this proletariat was not that well developed, so that proletariat will be taking help of the peasants in the Russian society. Okay, and how it would lead to establishment of socialism in Russia. Okay, and Trotsky here also, he was against the ideas of Stalin. Stalin had focused on socialism in one country. Okay, Trotsky idea was that unless there is revolutions in the advanced countries soon, the revolution in Russia would not sustain itself. Okay, so he believed the need of an international proletarian revolution against Stalin's concept of revolution in one country. Okay, and that would only be done by the help provided by the dictatorship of the proletariat, which was established in the Russian society. Okay, and in the end, you can write about Mao also. In the end, that Mao also talked about the concept of permanent revolution, and this was to prevent the emergence of a privileged class. And his cultural revolution, which was based on violence, you must have studied in world history also. So cultural revolution was also based on that idea. But primarily you have to emphasize on the view of Leon Trotsky. And this was considered as his greatest contribution to Marxism. Okay. So here it was, yes?
We could mention how Lenin also, he also talked about.
Now, Lenin talked about two-stage democratic revolution, that is, okay, in context of India also I have discussed, while discussing the Marxist perspective of national revolution and how M.N. Roy, he departed from Lenin's idea. Okay, but primarily you have to write about Leon Trotsky view and view of Mao. Okay, so in the end you can conclude with the view of Mao. This is revolution in permanence. Okay, a very short notes, 150 words. Whatever I have said, these points would be suffice as far as the requirement of the examination is concerned. Now, next, fourth is, if I say, now fourth question is basis of power. Okay, now basis of power, obviously, this is a very, UPSC always asks questions on this chapter, power. Okay, now basis of power, a very simple question. What is the basis of power? So you should start basically that, like other concepts in social sciences, the power is an essentially contested concept. It is an essentially contested concept, and here there are different views of the scholars as far as what are the basis of the power is concerned. First, you should always invoke Max Weber. And Max Weber, when he talked about three types of authority, the traditional authority, charismatic authority, legal rational authority. The basis of the exercise of authority, authority is a legitimate power, is different in all these cases. Now, when we talked about traditional authority, the basis of power is customs and traditions. Queen Elizabeth II, she passed away recently, and you know how the current Prince Charles also, he is the next heir to the throne, that is based on customs and traditions. Second, as far as charismatic authority is concerned, the base of exercise of power was the charisma of the leader. Gandhi, Hitler, charismatic authority. Third, if I say the legal rational authority, that is a form of bureaucracy that emanates from the office occupied by the individual. All of you will be district magistrates, you are preparing for that. So once you are sitting on the chair, you have occupied that chair as per certain rules and regulations, and your authority emanates from the office which you are occupying. Now, we find that after mentioning briefly Max Weber, you can also mention about the, if I talked about sources of political power, one of the bases of political power is constitution. Constitution, for example, you know, Supreme Court of India derives its power from the Constitution. Okay, and Supreme Court, now you are familiar with that, it has also started the live telecasting of the proceedings of the constitutional cases, constitution bench cases. Okay, if I talk about the Marx view, now Marxists talked about the economic basis of power as well as ideological base. Remember, Marx said the class which owns the means of production controls the power in the society because it controls the base and consequently the superstructure. And Marx also talked about ideological power, because when he talked about that, you know, the ruling ideas, the ideas of the ruling class in every epoch become the ruling ideas. And this idea was further developed by the concept of hegemony of Gramsci, the ideological manipulation of the ruling class. Okay, and Herbert Marcuse's concept of one-dimensional man, you are also familiar with that. Okay, now as far as we have discussed political, economic, and if I say another basis of power you can highlight is obviously the basis of if I say feminist also. Now, feminist question, and feminists say that it is patriarchy. Remember Kate Millett, her book Dialectics of Sex. She said the dialectics of sex is more fundamental than the dialectics of matter which Marx had talked about. Okay, so basically that's what you have to mention about this basis of power, and in the conclusion you can say that yes, power is one of the very central concepts of political science. This will suffice.
Could
Okay.
we also add interpellation by Althusser? It is also kind of
Interpellation is similar to hegemony, that writing so much is not no, there's no scope for much writing here. 150 words, the moment we are saying hegemony, it's almost parallel to interpellation. Okay, so 150 words capturing different dimensions of power. The moment I talked about ideological power, it's interpellation, it's covered in that. Okay, so instead of writing Althusser, you could focus on feminist in a way. Okay, now here next is, if I say, Locke's social contract. Very easy, Locke's social contract. But in this, as I told you, that in this short notes you have to write in such a way that it captures all the dimensions of his social contract, because you are giving the examiner a holistic picture of what was Locke's social contract. Okay, now in 150 words it is very easy to write what was Locke's social contract. If I say, now Locke's social contract, I think Shay has asked the question, is cultural relativism same as multiculturalism? Now multiculturalism is inspired by cultural relativism. Okay, now Locke's social contract, The Locke's social contract, you have to first understand that always mention the name of the book of the scholar in which the idea was given. Okay, and if I say Locke's social contract was given in his name of his book, the second treatise of government. Okay, and if you see the purpose of the giving social contract, recall his rejection of the Filmer's idea, Filmer's patriarcha we have discussed. So purpose of it was the rejection of the divine right of the king. Okay, and the social contract, he was a scholar of social contract tradition, which believed that state is an artificial creation. It's a result of the contract among the people, and the basis for the exercise of authority of the state is consent of the people. Okay, so it was a rejection of the divine right theory of the king, and obviously the state is based on the consent of the, it's an artificial device, it is based on consent of the people. Now, then straight away after writing this, you can move to what are the main terms of the contract. Here Locke talks about two terms of the two contracts he talks about. The first contract creates the civil society, and the second contract creates the political society. Okay, and here if you use the word cross comparison with Locke, just say unlike Locke, John Locke said that when people enter into a contract, the purpose of the contract is to protect the natural rights of life, liberty and property. People do not surrender all their rights. People give only that right to the state which they possess in the state of nature, that is right to be a judge in case of violation of their natural rights. Okay, so natural rights, the purpose of the contract was to protect natural rights of life, liberty and property. Okay, now after that you have to mention that unlike Hobbes, here John Locke said the government obviously does not have absolute right. He said government have the right which is given by the people, limited government, that is constitutionalism. And you have to also focus that John Locke gives people the right to rebel. That is no unconditional obligation. John Locke talks about the conditional obligation. Conditional obligation. Okay, and finally in the conclusion you can say that it was an important contribution to the classical theory of democracy, and John Rawls, not Locke, John Rawls used this same social contract tradition while deriving his principles of justice, we can mention. Okay, so this is what you have to supposed to write in this question, Locke's social contract. Okay, now yes, that is Locke's social contract. Now state of nature, that you can mention in a passing reference, that the purpose of the contract was natural rights to life, liberty and property, and this was to overcome the inconveniences of the state of nature. Just one phrase.
So in
Okay.
this kind of question, what should we write in conclusion? So this is very direct question. We can explain the concept. In conclusion, I'm not clear.
Conclusion, you can focus on legacy.
So Rawls connection.
That's what I said, that it's an important contribution to the classical theory of democracy. And obviously John Rawls also used it for his same methodology to derive his principles of justice. Yes, simple. So concept, name of the book, explain the concept and go for its legacy or its influence later on. That you can write here. Okay, since I've already included unlike Hobbes, unlike Locke, so that obviously contrasts it with Hobbes's social contract. Okay, now in fact a better way of starting introduction would be, you can simply say John Locke is called as a father of liberalism. Simple. Okay, now next question is, if I say okay, Now, this statement, I always emphasize in the class that if you want to understand the demand of the question, the essence of the question, you have to focus on the keywords and link the keywords, understand the demand of the question, half of your job is done. Okay. Here, if I had to focus on what were the keywords, now the question says factors like community, culture and nation weaken the hegemony of neoliberalism today. Discuss. Okay. Now in this question, you have to understand that this question demanded, broad understanding of how liberalism has been a dominant ideology, but liberalism has been challenged both philosophically as well as politically. Okay. Now, so here, how to proceed? Okay. Now, if you have to proceed, obviously, you can straight away begin with, since the question was hegemony of neoliberalism being challenged. Hegemony of neoliberalism being challenged by, the question says it is being challenged by community, culture and nation. Okay, yeah. It is being challenged by community, culture and nation. Okay. So in the best, good way I will say of starting the question would be straight away referring to Fukuyama. Okay. That Fukuyama's end of history. The moment he says end of history, that how liberalism emerged as the unchallenged ideology. It was the end point of mankind's ideological evolution, and liberalism emerged as the unchallenged ideology. Okay, best way of organizing human politics and society. Okay. Now, so end of history of Fukuyama you can mention, and then you can say obviously with the advent of globalization, this has assumed global phenomenon. Global institutions like World Bank, IMF, Washington Consensus, the promotion of liberal democracy as the best form of government across the world. Okay, so this introduction you have to mention that. Now straight away, then moving on to the challenges, how it has been challenged. Now, challenges you have to focus, since the question itself gives the three grounds of challenges, that is community, culture and nation. Now, if you see, the neoliberalism has been challenged philosophically and politically. Philosophically, it is challenged by communitarianism, multiculturalism and postmodernism. You may exclude postmodernism here because the question doesn't ask. Question only asked about community, culture and nation, the three terms. So if I talk about community and culture, here obviously, as far as community and culture is concerned, so community, you have to discuss about communitarians and cultural relativism and obviously multiculturalism you have to discuss, and both communitarianism and multiculturalism, they focus on politics of difference. The key term here is they focus on the concept of politics of difference. Okay. And then you have to discuss how communitarianism challenges the hegemony of neoliberalism and how cultural relativism and multiculturalism challenge that. Communitarianism, for example, and here you have to mention certain keywords, okay, and key concepts. Now, if I have to discuss about communitarianism, now communitarianism emphasizes on the role of the community in shaping the ideas, beliefs, value system of the individual. So first you have to emphasize on the role of community and then focus on how, against the liberal notion of isolated self, the communitarians focus on the concept of embedded self or situated self. So it is, I will say, the isolated self Against liberal notion of isolated self, you have to emphasize on how communitarians focus on the notion of embedded self or situated self. You have to also discuss about how communitarianism questions the liberal belief that self is prior to its end. They say self is not prior to its end, but self is rather constituted by its end. Michael Sandel's view. Self is constituted by its end. Communitarians emphasize on the notion of the community spirit. That if the individual wants to develop his all-round personality, he has to focus on the community spirit. The communitarians also focus on the rights of the community and not rights of the individual. Unlike liberalism, they focus on the rights of the community and they focus on the role of the state. Role of the state is not neutral. What liberalism say, state is a neutral arbiter. They say role of the state is to promote the notion of good which is held by the community. So no neutral state. A challenge to the philosophical basis of liberalism about individual, about society, about state. Okay. So this, and plus you can also mention the views of the some of the scholars, not more than two. That is, you can mention views of Michael Sandel or views of Alasdair MacIntyre. The Alasdair MacIntyre's notion of narrative self, you can just drop in here. So views of the scholars like MacIntyre and views of the scholars like Sandel will be suffice as far as this community's challenge to the liberalism is concerned. Moving on to the discussion of the how the cultural relativism has challenged the new hegemony of neoliberalism. Now, cultural relativism, I've discussed, you can simply write about, I've already discussed Asian values debate. Okay. And three grounds on which Asian values debate questions, I've already discussed: universalism versus particularism, the individual rights versus community rights, political rights versus social economic rights, that you have to mention. Okay. And you can also write about how the multiculturalism support the notion of differentiated citizenship. They support the notion of differentiated citizenship, group specific rights. Okay. What multiculturalism supports. Now moving on to the very interesting part, how the concept of nation challenges hegemony of liberalism. And you can straight away say that, the authoritarian nationalism in Russia and China in particular. Okay. So if we talk about the authoritarian nationalism, Russia and China, when they met this year, okay, in February, the two leaders, when they met, they issued a joint statement. And in joint statement, it was said that their version of democracy is a very good version of democracy, and the liberal version of democracy shall not be imposed on them. So China in fact says our version of democracy is better than liberal notion of democracy. The very name of China is PRC, People's Republic of China. So authoritarian nationalism has challenged that democracy is not only what liberal democracy says, it's the best form of government. No. Our democracy has its indigenous roots, and our democracy is better than the liberal notion of democracy. In fact, you can also talk about the protectionism. Now, protectionism, the trade war which was started by Trump against the China. Okay, and protectionism, it challenges the idea of free-flowing market, which was promoted by globalization. And obviously, the current pandemic, and in current pandemic, one term which became famous was vaccine nationalism. Vaccine nationalism. US, for example, US hoarded the vaccines and said only when the entire my population is inoculated, then only I'll be giving vaccines to the other countries. India did the same thing. Before the onset of the second wave, India was selling vaccines to the third world countries. But when second wave was raising its head, India stopped the supply, the export of the vaccines. Okay, and obviously, if I refer to the Italy's result, the rise of the far right. Rise of the far right in various countries. If you see Italian leader Giorgia Meloni, Giorgia Meloni, she is going to be the Prime Minister of Italy. Okay, so rise of the far right in many countries of Europe. Okay, that you can write. So this nationalism is said to be the most powerful ideology today, and that's how it has challenged the hegemony of neoliberalism. Now, one point you can also mention is obviously the 2007-8 economic crisis, that you can mention, that how it has become the era of regulated globalization, that state came to the rescue of the market. Neoliberalism talked about rollback of the state and others, and how this crisis in particular, the state came to prevent the market from collapsing, that you can mention here. Okay, and in conclusion, you can obviously write that yes, neoliberalism is the dominant ideology, but obviously it has been challenged, and that's how newer and newer insights have developed as a result of this challenge, that you can mention. Okay, Abhishek is asking, sir, can we mention overdeveloped state by Hamza Alvi? Now that will not be requirement here. Okay, that will not be a requirement here, because in overdeveloped state also, like Pakistan and India, if I say India example, we are following neoliberal policy, Washington consensus. Okay, now moving on to yes. Okay, so this is what you have to write. Okay, and this will be sufficient as far as this question is concerned. Now let us see the next one. Okay, second, the next one is now, equality of estates caused equality of power, and the equality of power is liberty. Comment. Okay, now a better way to understanding this question is, if I say, if I just word one prefix, that will make it clear. If I use the word inequality of estates, estates means property, caused inequality of power, and inequality of power is not liberty or not freedom. The moment you use the words, this prefix in, it becomes clear, more clear. Okay, now inequality of states means inequality of property, how it causes inequality of power, and how the inequality of power impacts the freedom. So basically this question was, if I say this question was related to the Marx's notion of power and Marx's notion of freedom. These are interconnected. Okay, so this question was related to the notion of power, Marxist notion of power, and Marxist notion of freedom. Okay, now how to begin this question? Now, in this question, okay, which talks about inequality of states. Now, here you have to understand that you have to write about the Marx's notion of freedom. Okay, so Karl Marx's notion of freedom. Remember, Marx's notion of freedom was having two components. The first is obviously the all-round development of human personality. It was all-round development of human personality. And second was obviously freedom from necessity. Freedom from necessity. And how Marx said that this freedom is compromised, is limited by inequality of power, meaning inequality of economic power. Okay, so Marx said, So this notion of freedom, you have to highlight how it was limited, or how it was limited by the inequality of power. And this inequality of power in society, remember Marx believed, we have just discussed the basis of power. Marx says is economic and ideological. Primarily it is economic, secondly it is ideological. Okay, so we have to discuss what is the cause for this. The cause for this is a class ridden society. And where do class comes? Class come from the existence of private property. Okay, so here you have to emphasize on how the existence of private property leads to inequality of power. There are two classes: the one class which owns the means of production, that is private property, and other which has to just forced to sell its labor power. And Marx also emphasized that this bourgeois democracy is a sham, and Marx also said that the concept of equality which was promoted by liberals, equality of opportunity, is in fact, Marx said, it is the inequality. He said this. It is in fact. He said this inequality of opportunity. Sorry, this equality of opportunity is in fact, it is a bourgeois right to inequality. Okay, equality of opportunity is a bourgeois right to inequality. So Marx in fact is a supporter of equality of outcome. Marx is supported equality of outcome, and how equality of outcome is very vital for the other types of equality: legal equality, political equality, and the other forms of equality are heavily dependent on this equality of outcome. Equality of outcome interpreted in terms of material equality, what the question is also demanding: equality of property. And Marx obviously supported that without this equality there will not be harmony in the society. So the cause of this whole inequality of power which leads to obstacle to freedom is private property. And after discussing this, you have to focus on the solution which was given by Karl Marx. Solution, Marx said, was establishment of the communist society. And this communist society, which will be a classless and stateless communist society, where it is a freedom of the free development of each is a condition for free development of all. And this communist society, with the abolition of private property, the state will wither away, and this will establish true democracy. And here the freedom will be realized, all round development of personality as well as freedom from necessity. Okay, so what Marx said, that you have to strike at the basic cause of this inequality which prevents emancipation. Remember, private property was cause for alienation. Private property also led to exploitation, and all this will end with the abolition of the private property in the communist society. End to exploitation, domination, oppression, perfect freedom and equality. Now, since the question asked about comment, so in comment you have to write about criticism also. And the criticism of the Marxist notion is, obviously you can simply mention about what is the criticism by neoliberals. Now, criticism by neoliberals like Hayek, you can also include Keith Joseph, that how they say that this equality of property is an unnatural outcome which can be achieved only by massive state intervention. It will lead to stagnation. It will also disincentivize the individuals, and it will violate the natural right to property. Remember, Hayek said individuals differ in skills, aptitudes, etc. And this leads to the difference in their level of success and hence inequality of property. So with this, you can conclude that how this requires massive state intervention, and this will violate the right of the individual. And in conclusion, you can say that yes, this humanist basis of freedom of Marx is still an inspiration, and how even critical theorists like Herbert Marcuse, they have also emphasized on this concept of freedom, but they are very pessimistic that whether this freedom can be actually brought about. Okay. Now, sir, in main body, should we also bring in socialism too, or just Marxist communism? Fine. Marxist communism is scientific socialism, so that it will be fine. Okay. Because this is basically about Karl Marx's views on power as well as his views on freedom. How you are connecting that? Okay. Yes. You want to asking something? This is what you have to write, Shrey. Okay. This is now she is asking, how do we find that it is about Marx? Now I will say, for that you have to understand the question, read the question. Equality of states cause equality of power, and equality of power is liberty. Okay, so that is how I mentioned that once you connect the two concepts of equality of power and equality and the liberty, basically you have to be clear with what was Marx's view of power and what is concept of freedom. Link it, answer is clear. Okay. Now, the next question, elitist theory of democracy denies the possibility of democracy as a rule of the people. Very simple question. It will ask about elitist theory of democracy, but you have to be careful in simple questions. You have to write it a bit carefully, because simple questions you have to touch all the dimensions of the elitist theory of democracy. Now, elitist theory of democracy. What shall be the question? Simply asks elucidate, means elaborate. Now this elitist theory of democracy. Now read the questions carefully, and since a question talks about, if I say, question says that the elitist theory of democracy denies, it says, elitist theory of democracy denies the possibility of democracy as rule of the people. So a good way of starting is straight away by referring to Abraham Lincoln's famous quote on democracy, that democracy is government of the people, by the people and for the people. Democracy has the faith in the capacity of the ordinary people to judge the issues. And even Aristotle, he also he appreciated the positive points of democracy, that people, the doctrine of collective wisdom, they have a better capacity to examine an issue, even better than a vice prince. Okay. Now, so after briefly discussing this, you can focus on straight away that how the elitist theory of democracy rejects this viewpoint, that democracy is the government of the people. So you have to first focus on what is the basic assumptions of the elitist theory of democracy. What are the views of these scholars? Views of these scholars. Now, assumptions of the elitist theory of democracy, they say that society is divided into elites and the masses, and this division is natural. The elites are identified by their special, competence and aptitude. And this competence and aptitude, it separates it from the rest of the masses. So what is they say, first you have to mention about this division of society into elites and masses, which is natural. Elites always say that masses are obliged, or masses are destined to follow the elites. And they have to choose between one elite or the other elites. And they also emphasize that, this elitist theory of democracy is, it emphasizes that, without elites, democracy will degenerate into mobocracy and populism. And this mobocracy and populism is a threat to liberty of the people. So why elites need to be in control? To prevent democracy from degenerating into mobocracy and populism. And the elitist theory of democracy, it focuses on procedures of the democracy. Okay, that free elections are there, peaceful transfer of power is there. So it is a part of the procedural theory of democracy, and it does not talks about the substance of democracy or the substantive theory of democracy. So in brief, you have to mention about the assumptions of the liberal theory of democracy. Now, discussing about the views of the scholars, here obviously you have to write about the, starting with Pareto, Mosca, Michels. Okay, so earliest it was given by Pareto, Mosca, Michels, C. Wright Mills, and later on Max Weber and Schumpeter. Schumpeter was a student of Max Weber. Okay, so Schumpeter and Max Weber, they also gave the views on elitist theory of democracy. Pareto, remember Pareto talked about, he said what distinguished elite from the masses? It was intelligence, talent, courage and cunning. He talked about lion and foxes. He also talked about the circulation of elites, governing and non-governing elites. Okay. Mosca said, what is the basis? The basis of the state is, the basis of the elites is the capacity of organization. He said every strata of society has its own capacity to produce the elites. And how he was more democratic than Pareto. And he also believed in the circulation of elites. In fact, he believed that, the elites, they invoked moral and legal principles to win the consent of the masses. Michels gave the iron law of oligarchy. Any democratic organization will be reduced to control of a few of the elites. And how these elites, they have the manipulative skills, persuasion, oratory, and how they make themselves indispensable to the organization. C. Wright Mills, he gave the notion of power elite, keeping in mind the American society, and how this power elite is themselves, power elite, they occupy by virtue of the high status in society. Businessmen, politicians, military leaders, they are capable of producing the demand themselves. And with this, you have to focus on the Weber also. Now, Weber talked about democracy is nothing but competition for leadership among the elites. And he says, even in a classless society, there will always be an elites who will be ruling the ruling class. So, classless society does not eliminate the privileged elites. Elites are indispensable. And Schumpeter, building on the ideas of Weber, gave his market model of democracy. The democracy is just like, the companies which compete in a marketplace to sell their products. So politicians also, they attract the votes by giving a very attractive programs. You can see what is happening in India. That's, with elections around, everybody is announced that the debate on the freebies. If there's a freebies, so you can also elite that how different elites, whether it is Aam Aadmi Party, BJP or Congress, all are promising soaps to the voters. And this is the voters' job is to select one or the other elites. Schumpeter said the redeeming feature of democracy is that there is circulation of power and it does not allow elites to hold absolute power, unlike what is in the communist society. So this is market model of democracy. So since the question was only about elucidate, you have to just explain this without any criticism. Okay. This is about elitist theory of democracy. Now, elitist theory of democracy, UPSC has asked after a long time. But anyway, this is a very important topic because it falls in democracy as well as a concept of power. So that is how you have to know. And that is why, we always focus that, your preparation shall be holistic. You cannot clear this examination with a selective approach. Because nowadays UPSC is focusing on interlinkage of the concepts. So if one concept you are not clear, you will not be able to correctly analyze and write the answers. Okay. With this, let us discuss the next question. The next question is, okay. Now this question 3A. Examine the liberal theory of state in the contemporary politics. Okay. Now she is asking, should we not mention Macpherson given the tone of the statement? That is your choice. Okay. I started this by referring to the Abraham Lincoln's concept of democracy. Okay. It depends on your choice. Okay. But since this question was about elucidation only, spasht kijiye. So I think that simple explanation will be fine. Had it been examined or critically analyzed, you should have written Macpherson. But anyway, there is no harm in saying that. Okay. It says denying it is your choice. Okay. My focus is on elitist theory of democracy, that I will be doing. In conclusion, you can in fact write about Macpherson. That Macpherson has criticized the elitist theory of democracy. Okay. Yes.
But the statement itself is like a critique of elite theory of democracy.
No, it was elucidate.
No, sir. Elite theory of democracy denies the possibility of democracy as the rule of people.
This is the essence of elitist theory of democracy. Had it been comment, it is just elucidate.
He's saying by reading the question, it seems like we have to write criticism.
No. That's
It's
about
a negative kind of statement.
Yes, sir. Democracy means rule of people. So, elite theory of democracy.
See, this is what the essence of elitist theory of democracy is. It rejects that democracy is not the government of the people, by the people and for the people. That is the basic essence of elitist theory of democracy. Okay. So that's what the question was, elucidate. Had it been comment, then criticism part would have come. It's just about elucidate. So what it says, all the writers who have discussed, they say the same thing. Okay. Now examine the liberal theory of state in the contemporary politics. Now here we find. Now this liberal theory of state in the contemporary politics, obviously, it's liberal theory of state. And the question is contemporary politics. Okay. Now contemporary politics. Now you have to discuss it at the theoretical level and at the applied level also. And theoretical level, obviously, it's a contest between the welfare state as well as the neoliberals. Welfare state and the neoliberals. Okay. And the applied part would be, obviously, I have already discussed, regulated globalization, the 2008 financial crisis. Okay. And if I say how the state is also in the case of the pandemic, you can also mention that it is state which came to the rescue of the people, how state was coordinating all the activities. Okay. So free vaccines, for example, is also a welfare step. Okay. And that too, the new liberal states like US, UK, they also did the same thing. Now welfare state, obviously, you have to write about the views of, you can say, it started in the ideas of Mill, and how the Beveridge report of 1942, the Beveridge report of 1942, as well as Keynesianism, it talked about state intervention in the economy. Okay. And this welfare state, cradle to grave, okay, Hobhouse, Lasky, they all supported the welfare state. And in fact, the social liberals, in today's context, the social liberals like Rawls, Dworkin, Amartya Sen, they also support the welfare state. Okay. So you have to discuss their views. And new liberals, now it emerged as a reaction to the welfare state in the 1970s, and how Thatcherism, Reaganomics became popular, and the main idea of neoliberal state was market fundamentalism. You have to discuss market fundamentalism. It was based on the concept of egoistical individualism. Egoistical individualism. So market fundamentalism, if I say, how market is good, state is bad. How state intervention in the economy has led to a lot of problems like inflation. It has not solved the problems of unemployment, inefficient public enterprises. Okay, and they talked about market works best when left alone by the state, and hence they were critical of the nanny state and they demanded the rollback of the state. Okay, and Thatcherism and Reaganomics I have already said. Okay, and here they also said that welfare state was also not justified on the because it created a culture of dependency, and how it was against the self-respect of the individuals also. And while discussing about neoliberals, you have to focus on the views of scholars like Hayek, scholars like Hayek, Friedman, Berlin, Nozick. You have to focus on their ideas. Okay. Now, the advent of globalization was obviously it led to popularization of the new liberal ideas, and how the new liberal ideas, it created certain problems like the one size fits all solution to the developing countries. It was not successful. Okay, and how the demand for the rollback of the state was also if state failed, the market also failed. So you have to focus on this regulated globalization and keeping in mind the issue of pandemic. At the same time, you have to also focus that the rising security threat, traditional as well as non-traditional, it has also made the state important. Okay, so state is, for example, if I talk about the contest between individual rights and the state security, Pegasus issue, if I say, for example. Okay, so how in this rising security threat, especially after 9/11, you find that the state is also taking many steps to regulate market also. Okay, for example, I hope you know about FATF, you know about G20. These are the examples how states are coordinating their activities. Okay, so that's what you have to write about this contemporary theory of the state, and this answer should focus on the debate between social liberals as well as the neoliberals. So the state now is acting as a facilitator, but state has still important role to play. It's not a rollback of the state, and in developing countries, the state still continues to play the role as an agent of development despite Washington consensus. Okay, so that since the question was asked in contemporary times, so contemporary times obviously both models are prevalent, and see examples of India in mind, example of leading states like UK in mind. If I give example of this pandemic vaccines, who gave substantial advance to companies like Moderna, companies like Pfizer? It is the US government which gave. So obviously now US, the state is not rollback of the state, but state is also playing an important role. This is what you have to mention in this, examine the liberal theory of state in the contemporary times. Now, having said that, if you see, the next question is, now human rights are complex and contested social practice that organizes relations between individual, society and state. Okay, now here you have to understand, again as I say, always focus by identifying the keywords. Okay, now here we find human rights are complex and contested social practice that organizes the relations between individuals, society and the state. And the question says comment. Okay. Now here we find, now Abhishek is saying, can we also quote hyper-globalist? Yes, you can quote hyper-globalist, but they talked about the state has become redundant. It is market. So, theory of the state, they talk about effect of hyper-globalist. Basically, they talk about effect of globalization on the state. So, in a mention, yes, you can mention, no harm in that. Okay. The debate between hyper-globalist, the skeptics and transformationists, that you can mention. Okay. Now, human rights are complex and contested social practice that organizes relations between individual, society and the state. So here you have to understand that how, if I say, if this is the individual, this is the state and this is the society. How the concept of human rights, it mediates the relationship between individual, state and society. That's what you have to focus on. And the question clearly gives you a hint. It talks about the two words complex, contested. Okay. Now, you have to understand that, you can start this answer by focusing on the definition of the human rights. Okay. So, the definition of human rights. What are human rights? Human rights are those rights which are available to human beings by them virtue of being human. Okay. Human rights are a demand of all humanity on all mankind. Okay. And human rights, you will find that human rights, you can also focus on the you can focus on the importance of the human rights, that how the three generation of human rights, the concept of three generation of human rights was given by Karel Vesak. And when he talked about first generation, second generation and third generation, the first generation inspired by the ideology of liberalism and promoted by the Western countries, it focused on civil and political rights. The second generation by the socialist countries, they focus on socio-economic rights. The third generation by the third world countries, they focus on solidarity rights. The moment you are talking about these three generations of rights, you're also giving a hint that how there is a contest among these different countries about what is the contest of human rights. Okay. So first world, civil and political rights. The second world, the socio-economic rights, and third world, the solidarity rights. Okay. After that, you have to always emphasize that human rights are dynamic in nature because they depend upon the consciousness of the society. What T.H. Green had also said, that rights are granted recognition by the moral consciousness of the community. So as the moral consciousness of the community has progressed, the notion of human rights has also progressed. Okay. Then you have to discuss about how the human rights become complex and contested. So while discussing it, you have to keep on emphasizing on the term complex and contested. Individual, state and society. Now, complex and contested, if I say, for example, if I talk about individuals, okay. Now, individuals, if I say these rights, okay. Now, these rights limit the state, limit the power of the state. It means these are rights, some rights are in form of the negative rights, some are in form of the positive rights. So you have to emphasize on the concept of negative rights as well as the concept of positive rights. Right to privacy is an example of the negative rights. And for example, in India, right to food, nobody dies of starvation. That is also a part of the the sustainable development goals now, is enabled by the state. Okay. So this negative and positive rights, how they decide the relation between individual as well as the state. Now, human rights, they invest the state with a very powerful obligation. No, the states have to protect and regulate the rights. So the protection and regulation of the rights, protection and regulation of rights is a key responsibility of the state. And how human rights, they come to affect the sovereignty of the state, because they emphasize the concept of responsible sovereignty. Remember, sovereignty, the exclusive state right to determine internally what is happening, is conditional upon how the state is judged as far as its performing its obligations towards granting and protecting these rights to its citizens. Okay, so these state with powerful regulation, they are standard to examine the conduct of the states. Standard to examine the conduct of the states, and it is a very ironical situation that states which are considered as a protectors of rights, states are also the worst violators of the rights. So protectors as well as violators of the right, you have to emphasize. And how? You can give the examples like what was happening in Darfur in Sudan. At the state, it was systematically exploiting the human rights of the people. What is happening in Rohingyas in Myanmar? It's how Rohingyas are treated as the second-class citizens, or Tamils in Sri Lanka. It was the same thing. Okay, so you can substantiate it with the help of the examples also. And how these human rights, when I say, are standard to examine the conduct of the state, this conduct of the state can be seen in terms of the war. This conduct of the state can be seen in terms of the aid which the state gives, or it can be seen in context of the trade policies also. War, what is happening in Ukraine, the Bucha killings, they highlighted how the Russian government was accused of killing the civilians. Aid and trade policies. Trade policies, for example, how? If I say in WTO, it is said that the negotiations on agriculture, that if the third world countries are forced to open their markets for the subsidized products of the Western countries, that will lead to a disaster in countries like India. Okay, so trade policies that you can also decide. Now, when I said states are the worst violators of the human rights, therefore I also said, and that brings to the concept of humanitarian intervention as well as right to protect principle. Okay, so how human rights are India, for example, India has very objected to this intervention under R2P principle, because India believes that UN Charter is founded on the respect for sovereignty of the country, and India has objected to the humanitarian intervention. Okay, so this highlights the relationship between individual as well as the society. While discussing about this R2P, you can cite examples. One example would be sufficient, Libya, for that. Okay, and discussing about individual and the society. Now, individual and society, obviously you can mention about cultural relativism. Cultural relativism. Okay, that how cultural relativism, communitarians, they emphasize on the politics of difference. They have questioned the notion of the universal human rights, and how they say that rights are society specific, which is again contested by critics like feminists that we have discussed. You can mention it here. Okay, so here that's how you have to understand. And if I say yes, now after saying that criticism and of the individual and state, now coming to the relation between state and society. Okay, now state and society, obviously, for example, if I talk about civil society activism, now there are many human rights group. You must be aware with Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch. Okay, they publicize the reports of violation of human rights by the state. For example, the international body UN Human Rights Council, recently it gave a report on the human rights violation in the Xinjiang province of China. Okay, and Amnesty International, it also carries out report of the violations of the human rights, highlighting that. In case of India, in J&K, India rejected the reports presented by the Amnesty International, saying it is a biased version of what they are presenting. So this is also a contest between state and the civil society. Civil society also influenced the state to give many rights as the human rights. For example, if I give the case of India, then in case of India, you must be familiar with a body called National Advisory Council. A National Advisory Council, it influenced the shaping of the Right to Food Security Act. Okay, so civil society also influences the government to expand its notion of human rights as well as holding government accountable. So it works in both ways. Okay, role of human rights NGOs, all this comes into play here. So this is a relation between civil society and the state, individual and society, and state and the individual. Three dimensions you have to emphasize. Okay, and in conclusion, you can say that yes, human rights, despite being complex and contested, these are very vital for the all-round development of the individuals. Now, even the countries like Saudi Arabia and Iran, they have not rejected the concept of human right per se. They have said, what is human rights? It shall be determined by our Islam, that is our religion. So the distinction of the the disagreement is about the content of the human rights and not about the concept of human rights per se. Okay, so that we can mention in the conclusion as well.
You can also go to T.H. Green, like every state.
I mentioned about that human rights are dynamic.
No, that every state is known by every society is known by the rights it provides.
Now every state is known by the right it maintains. That Lasky said. Okay, Lasky said. Okay.
So that connection.
That you can say. Obviously, when I told you that human rights invest the state with powerful obligation to not only protect and regulate human rights. You can write about Lasky. Yes, Sarthaki is saying that yes, every state is known by the right it maintains. Yes, you can write that. So that you can, and this was I will say a very good question, because this question touched upon different dimensions of the syllabus. Human rights, sovereignty, and cultural relativism, all these things coming into play. Okay. So, the student who is well read can easily attempt this question in a better manner. Okay. Coming to the next, it talks about very straight question. Individualism is inherent in Hobbes's absolutist ideology and comment. Okay. Now this comment, the word used is comment. Again I say, always proceed with identifying the keywords to understand the demand of the question. And here individualism, absolutism in Hobbes' ideology and comment. This was a very straight question. We have discussed it a number of times in the class as well. And it talks about how Hobbes was considered as a greatest individualist. Okay. So Hobbes as greatest individualist. And since the question talks about the comment, so you have to also mention about the criticism. So Hobbes as the greatest individualist, so you have to justify how Hobbes was a greatest individualist as well as the criticism of Hobbes's ideas. Simple. Now, Hobbes as the greatest individualist, you have to understand that while writing this question, you have to focus on, obviously, you can straightaway start with the comment of Sabine. Okay, that Hobbes was a individualist to the core, or you can also ask about the views of Dunn, where Dunn says that Hobbes's premises are individualistic and liberal, but his conclusions are no, absolutist and illiberal. Okay, so straight away in the introduction you have given a hint that what is going to follow. Okay, and you can also emphasize that how individualism and absolutism are two sides of the same coin of Hobbes's philosophy. Okay, having said that, you have to proceed to identify how Hobbes was a greatest individualist, and that we can understand that first you have to emphasize on what was his assumption about human nature, which present assumption on human nature which present him as a great individualist. Second, how as far as the terms of the contract is concerned, how it was a greatest individualist, and how it is said, if we talk about the duty of the sovereign, okay, the duty of sovereign, and if you examine all these, you find that yes, Hobbes was a consistent individualist. In fact, it is said his entire philosophy revolved around individual. That's what you have to emphasize. Now, first point is assumption about human nature. Now, Hobbes, remember, he was inspired by the leading philosophers of his age, Galileo in particular, and Hobbes, this mechanical materialism. Okay, Hobbes is mechanical materialism. It says everything which happens is due to the motion of particles, whether it is human brain, whether it is any event happening in the universe. Okay, in fact, he wanted to make he, as it is said, that he was proving theorems in politics. Okay, the science which inspired him most was geometry. Okay, now this is for your explanation. You have to focus on what Hobbes actually said about human nature. So he established the utilitarian nature of man, and this utilitarian nature of man, that pleasure and pain are individual experiences. It is all the result of the motion of particles in the brain, and individuals cannot comprehend the views of the others. He can understand what goes on in his mind, and that is why individual is selfish in nature, and being selfish is not a sin. What was also said in Machiavelli's writings. Okay, so how it was similar to as natural as the earth which revolves around the sun. First point, utilitarian nature of man. And then he also said that individuals, they were power seekers. They were power seekers, they were the aggressive and competitive. Power seekers, aggressive, competitive, they were asocial. Okay. Always looking for pleasure and avoiding pain. This desire for power ceases only in death. And aggressive. Okay. He always considers the other individual as a source of threat. So his assumptions was about the individual. And then he built his philosophy on it is said that the building block of his edifice of state was the individual. Terms of the contract. Now, individuals in the state of nature, it was a state of war. So they wanted to leave the state of nature, which was a state of pain, entered into a terms of contract with each other. And the consent was the basis of authority. This was a very important contribution of Hobbes. Whose consent? The concept of the individuals. And that is why it is said Hobbes added the element of legitimacy to the authority of the sovereign. Okay. And here the terms of the contract was the sovereign will ensure the self-preservation of the individuals. This right is still right which individual still pertain. He surrendered all the rights but not this right. And Hobbes also accepted the right to resist this sovereign. He also accepted the right to resist the sovereign in case your right to self-preservation was threatened. Okay. So Hobbes, that's what you have to discuss about the terms of the contract, and that was unconditional obligation. Hobbes emphasized on the unconditional obligation, because the question talks about absolutist nature of the Hobbes' theory also. So unconditional obligation means obviously you have to obey the commands of the sovereign. Now, duty of the sovereign, obviously duty of the sovereign was to treat individuals equally. Treat individuals equally. And sovereign was to ensure that Hobbes also, in that Hobbes' idea, there is a nascent public-private divide. Nascent public-private divide, which was further developed by John Locke. That sovereign is confined only to the political matters, and sovereign will not interfere in religious and economic matters. Because why? This notion of public-private divide. The private sphere is a sphere of individual freedom. We can also find in Hobbes' ideas. And it is said that, the sovereign, what is the very reason the people entered into a contract was to lead a civilized life. And it is said that sovereign derived his power from the individuals. The reason for the existence of the sovereign was to serve the individual. The state was a neutral referee. I said the state was a neutral referee, and state was there to serve the individual. It's an artificial device created for the service of the individuals. And the absolute power of the state was justified on the basis of this aggressive nature of the individual. Because individual nature, it does not changes even after formation of the civil society and the formation of the society and the state. Individual remained the same, and this absolute power of the state was needed to restrain such individuals, that they obeyed the rules of the game and they shall not encroach upon the similar freedom of others. The notion of liberty of Hobbes, he linked it with law. Liberty is where the law is silent. Okay. So the sovereign owed his existence to the individuals. If the Leviathan threatened the individual, the very rationale for his existence was gone. And that is why Hobbes, we find that his entire philosophy revolves around individualism. This is the first aspect of the question you have to understand. And the second aspect is criticism. Now in criticism, obviously you can straight away mention John Locke. John Locke, he said, that way his social contract we have just discussed. John Locke said, how can individuals who do not trust the foxes, they will ever agree to create an all-powerful lion at the risk of getting devoured by the lion itself? Very important criticism. And how John Locke also talked about constitutionalism, we have discussed. John Locke also talked about limited political obligation, that they have a right to revolt if the state does not replace one state by the other. It does not risk going back to the state of nature. So Hobbes gave sovereign limited authority, and the purpose of the state was to protect the life, liberty and property of the individual. So one criticism you can simply write here about John Locke, that will suffice, and that's what you are expected to write here. So it was a pretty straight question, but since the question was comment, so you have to discuss about both sides of the divide. You have to answer positive as well as negative. Okay. So moving on to the next question. Now next question, if we find is now this question, Dr. Ambedkar's idea of social justice leads to egalitarian justice as compared to Rawls's justice as fairness. And if you see this is a very good question, I will say. And that's how any student can easily answer this question, provided the student has conceptual clarity. Okay. What is Rawls' notion of justice? What is Ambedkar's notion of social justice? And that's what you have to focus here. Okay. Now, as I say, always identify the keywords before proceeding to answer this question. Now, here if I have to identify the keywords. Now, the question talks about how Ambedkar's idea of social justice leads to egalitarian justice as compared to Rawls's justice as fairness, which aims at the notion of pure procedural justice. And the question says, comment. Okay. The examiner has himself or herself given the keywords in that lot of keywords, and while writing the answer, these keywords should reflect in your answers. Okay. Now, one way of interpreting this question, which I found more feasible, okay, is basically you can do a comparative analysis between ideas of justice of Rawls and social justice of Ambedkar. Why I'm saying comparative analysis? That will help you answer this question in a better manner, where you can talk about the similarities in their approach and the differences in their approach. Okay. Now, if we talk about what shall be the structure of the answer? Okay. Now, in the beginning, you can write with the definition of the social justice. What is social justice? Social justice, as all of us we know, that it is a voice of the oppressed and underprivileged sections of the society, and it aims to restore the dignity which these oppressed and underprivileged sections of society have suffered for hundreds of years. And social justice aims at providing the equal opportunity for these sections to develop their personality. Okay. This is what is concept of social justice. So just in briefly, after defining social justice, you can straight away discuss about the difference in the context in which these ideas emerged. The reason is, the significance of this is, if you are writing about the context, that obviously will give you how their ideas, this context is the reason why their idea is similar as well as idea is different. You can also say that, as we already proceed, we have discussed many times, a thinker is a child of his time. John Rawls, a philosopher, and Ambedkar was also a thinker. So this thinker is a child of time, the moment you say, that captures the context. And context was obviously for Rawls, if you find, for Ambedkar and Rawls, the context was quite different, having some elements of similarity and differences. For Ambedkar, it was the hierarchical caste system and untouchability, which shaped his ideas towards egalitarian justice. And Rawls, we find the social movements in the US in the 1960s, whether it is anti-Vietnam War protest or the protest against nuclear disarmament, civil rights movement, feminist movement. Okay. And Ambedkar, and here we also find that apart from the context, the influence is also important. Influence is, as you know, Ambedkar was guided by the ideals of French Revolution, in particular liberty, equality and fraternity. And John Rawls was a liberal thinker, okay, inspired by the ideology of liberalism. Okay. So having said that in the introduction, you can then focus on what are the similarity and what are the differences. What are the similarity and what are the differences in their social justice? Okay. Now, similarity, if I say, now since the question already mentions that Rawls' theory of justice was a pure procedural justice. Okay. So you have to say that, though Rawls' theory of justice was a pure procedural justice, how John Rawls has already said that under controlled conditions, it can be modified to take care of the aspects of the distributive justice. Okay. And here, John Rawls and Ambedkar's social justice, they believe that justice is a foundation of society. Okay, so both believe that justice has to be the foundation of society. In fact, Ambedkar, John Rawls said that justice is a first virtue of social institutions. Okay, so justice is the foundation of society, and you have to understand that the notions of justice, of social justice of Ambedkar and Rawls, it was premised on the need for equality. Both emphasized on it was premised or based on the need for equality. And the ground in which John Rawls criticized utilitarianism, that you will find that almost similar to what Ambedkar also what was also Ambedkar's notion of social justice. For example, Ambedkar's notion of social justice, it talked about how individuals are end in themselves. How individuals are end in themselves. Ambedkar's notion of social justice also talked about how it talked about equal opportunity for development. For development of the individuals, and how Ambedkar's notion of social justice also talked about that the terms of association between individuals has to be based on the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. And once we see this idea of Ambedkar's social justice, we find that it is the same which we find in John Rawls' ideas. For example, end in themselves. Did John Rawls rejected utilitarian principle of greatest happiness of the greatest number? Yes, he was inspired by Kant's philosophy and said every individual possesses an dignity which the welfare of society cannot override. Individuals and end in themselves. Equal opportunity for development. That's how he also talked about equality, equal opportunity for development. And the second principle of John Rawls, principle 2b, it talks about the equal opportunity principle. And third, terms of association shall be based on liberty, equality, and fraternity. And John Rawls also supported this idea. Okay. Now, so obviously it was needs. The first I said, justice is the foundation of society. Second, third, and fourth, we find both Ambedkar and in fact the fourth you can also mention about the influence. Influence were the same liberal values. Fifth, if I say as far as the role of the state is concerned, there was similarity in the ideas of Ambedkar and John Rawls. Role of the state was obviously it was a welfare state. Welfare state. Remember the difference principle of John Rawls. It supported substantially redistributive welfare state. Here we find that the chain connection of John Rawls. It talked about giving help to the most disadvantaged section of the society. Ambedkar's social justice also stood for help, welfare state, the role of the state in carrying out the upliftment of the weakest sections of society. And if you find the principle of reservation in the Indian Constitution, the provision of reservation is what falls to the difference principle of John Rawls. And that's what Ambedkar also supported. Okay. So Ambedkar's, John Rawls' difference principle, greatest benefit to the least advantaged section. That was also we find in case of Ambedkar's ideas. Okay. Now here, apart from that, we find that there were also significant differences in their approach. Okay. Now, significant differences in their approach in the sense that you have to understand context was very important, and Ambedkar's term which is used in the syllabus, in the question, it talks about egalitarian justice. If we talk about egalitarian justice, he talked about justice in all the dimensions: political, social, and economic. Political, social, and economic. Okay, and here we find, for Ambedkar, justice means equality in all the dimensions. Remember the statement, famous statement which he gave, that democracy is just the top dressing of the Indian society, and political democracy needs socio-economic democracy for its success. Socio-economic democracy are the tissues and fibers of the political democracy. Okay, one person, one value has to be seen in all these aspects. And for Ambedkar, democracy was a way of life. So Ambedkar gave priority to equality. Ambedkar gave priority to equality. And for John Rawls, it was equality. Remember the lexical priority of John Rawls. What is the lexical priority of John Rawls? The first principle, equal liberty principle. And liberty means freedom of speech, expression, everything what will fall in the category of political democracy. So Ambedkar priority was equality in all these spheres. That was very important. And for John Rawls, equality is secondary to liberty. Okay. Next, this is the first difference in their ideas. Second, we find, okay, now you have to understand that Ambedkar's social justice, when I talk about social sphere, Ambedkar's social justice, also Ambedkar believed that social change should precede the political change. Social change should precede political change. And here he talked about abolition of untouchability, and Ambedkar also talked about equal rights to women. Remember, this was one of the reasons why he resigned over the differences with Nehru on the Hindu Code Bill. Okay. So from a feminist perspective, Ambedkar did talk about equality of women in the personal sphere also. Remember the marriage, personal laws, marriage, inheritance, divorce, etc. Ambedkar supported that. And what Susan Moller-Rockin says, Rawls was silent on injustices within the family. Okay, so this equal rights to women versus silence over injustices in the family. Silence over injustices in the family. Fine. Now here when I talked about Ambedkar talked about justice in political, economic and social sphere. This point I forgot. You should always mention this point here. Remember in his book, Political Liberalism, what did John Locke say? It is liberal political conception of justice. So he limited it to liberal political conception of justice. It means applicable to political sphere. In his second book, the Political Liberalism, 1993, liberal political conception of justice. And for him, it was in all these spheres: social, political, economic. As far as from the feminist perspective is concerned, they'll find Ambedkar's ideas more egalitarian as compared to John Rawls. Okay. Third, John Rawls accepted. Third difference, very important difference if I say. John Rawls accepted in his second book the communitarian notion of justice. Remember, when he talked about the overlapping consensus, he talked about the public-private divide. Public-private divide. That in public sphere, remember what was Michael Walz's conception of justice? What is justice or not? It is defined by community's context of justice, community's notion of justice. So John Rawls accepted that in the private sphere, they will continue to be guided. They will continue to be guided by community's notion of justice. They will continue to be guided by the community's notion of justice. While in the public sphere, it will be overlapping consensus. Ambedkar would reject this idea. Why? As per communitarian notion of justice, it would justify caste inequalities. The very example Michael Walzer gives while we are talking about his complex equality, that what is justice or not, it depends on community's notion of justice. Justice cannot be universal. If the members of the society share the same meaning of the caste and the notion of the social goods, whatever distribution results from that shared notion is justified. And Ambedkar would have rejected that, because that would have meant accepting caste inequalities. The three most fundamental differences between Ambedkar and John Rawls' notion of justice. Okay. So, another point I will say is Ambedkar's social justice. Okay. It talked about uniform civil code, common code for all citizens. John Rawls would not have accepted that, because John Rawls said what is in the public sphere, they continue to be guided by the community's notion of justice. And so Ambedkar supported UCC and John Rawls rejected UCC. Okay. And if I say Ambedkar also supported state socialism. Ambedkar supported state socialism as an element of its justice. That how to promote socio-economic democracy, state shall nationalize the agriculture, control industry, control insurance, and private sector will exist. John Rawls supported a welfare state, redistributive welfare state, which taxes and provides primary goods to the people. Okay. So Ambedkar's version of state socialism, it was more, I will say, rigorous responsibility of the state as far as management of the economy is concerned. Okay. So these five differences we can highlight, and then in conclusion we can write that despite the differences, the ideal of the goal of John Rawls and Dr. Ambedkar was the same. It concerned about the this inequality in the society, and they had different prescriptions, and how it is also an important contribution to the theory of justice, that we can simply say. Okay. Now, okay. So this is about second and third book. Now some students also asked that can we include John Rawls' views on global justice here as far as Ambedkar is concerned. I think that would not be necessary here. These points of similarity and these points of differences, I mentioned about 5 similarity points. I also discussed about the 5 points of difference. Just mention that, and in the conclusion you can write whatever I had discussed. Okay. So this was, in fact, I would say a good question, and I always encourage students that do not get intimidated by the length of the question. Try to deconstruct the question. Okay. The method which also Hobbes adopted, resolutive composite method. He was inspired by Galileo in that resolve the question into its constituent parts, try to link the relation and then recompose it. That will help you. Okay. So if you have conceptual clarity, there's no point that that this question would have troubled you. Okay, with a little bit of thinking you can easily proceed it. And those students, you will be aware that there's not a single thing extra which I have discussed as far as this question is concerned. It is on the basis of what our classroom discussion, and it is the application where you have to connect the dots. That's it. interlinkages, because and last year it was question asked on the comparison between Greek perspective of justice and the Rawls's notion of justice. This year Ambedkar social justice and Rawls notion of justice. So be prepared that Rawls justice has become a very favorite topic of UPSC, and you need to see it in a holistic manner. Okay, so whatever justice is asked, try to say that this may be a probable question also. Okay, now having said that, see this question, the panchayats and the gram sabhas. Okay, the panchayats with gram sabhas should be so organized so as to identify the resources locally available for the development of agricultural and industrial sectors. Examine the statement in the context of the Gram Swaraj. Okay, so this is a very good way of asking question, in which the statement gives you the context, and in that context you have to elaborate upon the concept of Gram Swaraj. Okay, now here, if you understand this question thoroughly, okay, identify the keywords, link them to understand the demand of the question. Now, my understanding of the question says that this question was related to the Gandhian scheme of democratic decentralization. At the same time, it also linked with the Gandhian model of development. Okay, so if you are clear with what was Gandhi's concept of democratic decentralization and the Gandhian model of development, link them, the result is the answer. Okay, so if I talked about this, what shall we write here? Now, in the introduction, now you can straight away write with, if I say, since this talks about panchayats and with gram sabhas, panchayats have been in existence in India since centuries, I will say. Okay, can I say panchayat is an indigenous institution of dispute resolution? Okay, based on India's culture. Okay, so a good way of writing this answer would be highlighting how straight away you can write the view of Bhikkhu Parikh. Start with the view of Bhikkhu Parikh, where Bhikkhu Parikh talks about the unsuitability of the modern state in Indian context, and how Gandhi gave an alternative which was to be rooted in India's history, India's civilizational values, which should empower the rural masses and which should be based on the principle of decentralization. Recall Manusmriti, the principle of decentralization was already there. Okay, so here you have to write about Bhikkhu Parikh, that how Gandhi emphasized on the unsuitability of the modern state in India's context. In fact, Gandhi had also talked about that if India copies England, India will be ruined. Okay, and how the alternative which he gave, alternative was obviously in fact that was to be based on Indian civilizational values and history of India. It should empower rural masses. And what Bhikkhu Parikh also says, Gandhi's belief was also that it would be based on a decentralized structure. One of the ground of criticism of the modern state was obviously that it was a product of the materialist Western civilization. State is a violence in concentrated form. And recall that Gandhi also believed that this modern state would be dominated by urbanized elite. Okay, so having in that contrast, the Gandhi alternative was empowering of the masses. Okay, so just briefly, just starting the Bhikkhu Parikh statement. Okay, you can straight away go on to discuss the theoretical part. Now this question I will emphasize on the theoretical part as well as the applied part. The theoretical part, you have to drop in the keywords. Okay, while discussing Gandhian scheme of democratic decentralization along with Gandhian model of development. Because if you see the question, it talks about resources locally available for development of agriculture as well as for industry. Okay, so here we find Gandhi, like Aurobindo, he believed that India's regeneration will come only with the regeneration of Indian villages. And Gandhi believed that soul of India lives in the villages. So to bring about the regeneration of Indian village, Gandhi gave his concept of democratic decentralization. Okay, and this democratic decentralization was based on the notion of a village, self-sufficient, autonomous village republics, Gram Swaraj. So what was Gram Swaraj? You have to explain that yes, it was based on self-sufficient, autonomous village republics. Which empowers people. And here, you have to also discuss that how Gandhi's concept of oceanic circle. Oceanic circle, power flowing from the power, there is no hierarchy, and how all these levels of the organization, they keep the individual at the center, maximum power concentrated at the local level. So concentrate, you have to mention about oceanic circle. And here Gram Swaraj also meant that people also having the ability to check abuse of power. Ability to check abuse of power. And Gram Swaraj meant that their relationship was based on ideals of cooperation and common good. Ideal of cooperation and common good. This was a philosophical basis on which this ideal of Gram Swaraj, and Gandhi said it will be an ordered anarchy. Ordered anarchy. Remember his concept of ordered anarchy, that enlightened anarchy was his ideal as a philosophical anarchist, but he realized it cannot be achieved, so he went for ordered anarchy, where every individual would be ruling himself, and hence as a collective level, it will be based on cooperation as well as common good. Having said that, now this prepares the ground for how you have to link Gram Swaraj with his concept of economic Swaraj. Okay, so his concept of economic Swaraj, which talked about reform of agriculture. It talked about reform of agriculture. It talked about land reforms where land should be given to the tiller. It talked about the most the needs of the villages met with the local resources. It also talked about the animal husbandry, that is part of agriculture. So economic Swaraj had two components, agriculture as well as economy. And as per the demand of the question, you have to highlight it. Okay, you have to highlight this use of the local resources. So agriculture, land to tiller. If you see agriculture, which is based on also inform animal husbandry to give additional income to the farmers. Okay, and improvement of the agriculture, to boost the production with the local resources. That's what Gandhi believed. And as far as economy is concerned, now economy is obviously his use of simple technology. Simple technology, that how he believed in not mass production but production by masses. And how he also talked about the village handicrafts, the revival of the village handicrafts. How he also talked about economic Swaraj also means minimization of the wants. Minimization of wants, where every person's basic need will be fulfilled. But minimization of want, Gandhi had said that earth has sufficient resources to fulfill everybody's need, but not even 9 earths would be insufficient to fulfill everybody's greed. So economic Swaraj was also based on minimization of wants. Okay. Now here, so this is what Gandhi believed in. He was not against machinery per se, but he wanted simple technology, simple machines. Okay. Now, this is as far as the theoretical aspect is concerned. So, Gram Swaraj, Gram Sabha as the nucleus of the Gram Swaraj, and in today's context also you will find that it is Gram Sabha which is still called as the watchdog of democracy. As per the 73rd Amendment Act, the Gram Sabha is called as a watchdog of democracy. Watchdog of democracy means ability to check the abuse of power. That's what I hinted. So here, coming to the applied part. Now this is where you can use your knowledge of what is taught to you in Gandhian model of development, as well as you can link it with the sustainable agriculture, the concept of organic farming, the concept of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, etc. The 3 R's I've emphasized in the classes. Okay, so here obviously the 73rd Amendment Act, and in fact you can also talk about the PESA. Okay, they talked about the importance of the Gram Sabha as the watchdog of grassroots democracy. And this was done to implement the Article 40 of the Indian Constitution, which is a Gandhian principle in the directive principles of state policy. Okay, here we find that obviously the various schemes of the government, you can find it also promote the use of local resources in industry as well as in agriculture. For example, if I say the concept of organic farming. What is organic farming? Use of the locally available manures and not use of any chemical fertilizer. Okay, and if you see the government scheme, like you must be aware about TriFed. TriFed links the tribal products to corporates, providing them a good market. Schemes like TriFed. If I talk about Aspire, the policy of the government Aspire, it promotes rural industrialization based on the local resources. Okay, and here we find that Prime Minister Krishi Sichai Yojana. Now this Krishi Sichai Yojana, you must be familiar with its famous slogan, more crop per drop. Okay, so India is obviously especially India is collaborating with Israel in dryland agriculture, that our local resources can be used in a more effective manner to boost the agricultural production. And you can conclude by highlighting the relevance. What is the relevance? Relevance in that context, you find that in the era of global warming and climate change, this is very important for sustainable development. And how the SDGs include the reflection of the Gandhian principle we can find in many of the goals of the sustainable development. Okay, and especially in this era of global warming and climate change, reduce, reuse, recycle, minimization of wants. Organic farming, that's how it will cut down emissions. Okay, and how the locally available resources that also can I say the locally available resources provide an insurance against any disruption in supply chain? Pandemic or the war in Ukraine, it has disrupted the supply chain. So how the available of the local resources will also shield insulate from any supply chain disruption. So here, by this you are linking it with the current developments. And this, if you write this term, this will fetch you 1 marks extra, I'm sure for that. Okay. So now try to keep your eyes and ears open and build on your knowledge, not only about political science, but also whatever you have learned in GS to highlight the relevance of that context in the current circumstances. The moment you write this, obviously, that will give a very good picture to the examiner, a very good impression to the examiner that the student is well read and is substantiated his or her views by writing these examples. Okay. Coming to the last question was a very direct question, if I say. Okay. Now, last question is a very direct question, and it talks about examine the entitlement theory of justice. Okay. So that is simply the theory of justice by Robert Nozick. Okay. However, if we talk about what shall be the component or what you shall be explaining, entitlement theory of justice. Now the question talks about, the question says, examine the entitlement theory of justice. So obviously, you have to write here about the Robert Nozick's ideas of, you have to first understand the context in which he gave that idea. And as I said, always try to mention the name of the book of the thinker or scholar. The name of his book was Anarchy, State and Utopia in 1974, which he wrote with reference to John Rawls' theory of justice. With reference to Rawls's theory of justice. And Robert Nozick was a neoliberal. He was a neoliberal scholar who objected to the welfare state, and he supported the minimal state. Introduction, fine. Moving on to entitlement, you have to explain what is entitlement. What is entitlement as per Robert Nozick? And entitlement, Robert Nozick basically was inspired by John Locke's idea of property. And he says that, entitlement is an individual is entitled to a property which he or she has earned by fair means, without force or fraud. And it talks about the grounds of entitlement. First, he talks about his initial acquisition. And second, he talks about his voluntary transfer. And his entitlement theory is based on the idea of egoistical individualism. That individual owns his talent, skills, and for that he owes nothing to the society. Society also owes nothing to him. Okay. So it was inspired by John Locke's view, and initial acquisition and voluntary transfer, you have to say. Third aspect is also the rectification, which you talked about. And rectification only under certain exceptional circumstances. Okay. Like example which he gave, that you can also mention, that he cites example of a person, a doctor creating a cure for cancer. So if he is demanding exorbitant fee for that, he is not making anybody worse for that. Or the example of the famous basketball player he gives, Will Chamberlain, that if people are willing to pay, or if I say in today's context, Surya Kumar Yadav, he is a very hot property in T20. So in that, if we are paying to watch that person's play, that entirely belongs to him. Rectification comes in where it gives example of an oasis in desert. Okay. And oasis in desert, obviously, that means you are depriving entire population of that, and in that case state can interfere. Okay. So basically you have to understand that, he was, when he gave the entitlement theory of justice, he was critical of the welfare state policy. So he argued against any redistribution. He argues against any redistribution. He said, this redistribution violates individual liberty, and this amounts to forced labor when the state takes away a part of his property, and it also amounts to legalized theft. So two terms which he used was forced labor as well as legalized theft. Okay, so this is what you have to understand, and that's why he supported that state has to play the role of a night watchman. Minimal state. State is concerned only with maintaining the law and order, security, and doing taxation for carrying out certain activities. There is no point of state to engaging in redistributive transfers. Now, you can conclude by writing the criticism of Robert Nozick's idea. And Robert Nozick's idea, obviously, you can you can give example of Macpherson, or you can also give example of Amartya Sen, their views. Macpherson, for example, obviously, critics say that this is purely based on market fundamentalism and how market leads to inequality, and for you need to improve the capacity of the people. His development of capacity, okay, and capability approach of Amartya Sen that you can answer. And obviously Macpherson, he says that this is a justification of the neoliberal principles, okay. And this is what a very simple question, direct question. So if you see overall this paper had some very direct questions, but at the same time some thoughtful, insightful questions. And as I have interacted with our old students, those who appeared in mains, they were comfortable in answering these questions. So as I say that, the fundamental requirement of the optional, as with any other paper of GS also, is conceptual clarity first, and second is ability to interlink the different aspects of the syllabus. The moment you have possessed these two things, you will be in a very good position, okay. So I hope that you found this discussion useful. Okay, we'll stop here. Thank you.